There are some signs of life beginning to return to normal. But as we step our way out of lockdown, we'll need to understand how our behaviour affects the spread of the virus. And one way of doing that is with mathematical models.
We keep hearing about the modelling of the outbreak, but what does that actually...
This is the modelling from Imperial College. Now,
the scientific modelling warned that Britain was on course for a catastrophic epidemic and
over the last 2 months, our lives seem to have been controlled by models. And they'll continue to shape how we live with this virus.
Mathematical models allow you to simulate how a virus spreads through a population. But critically, they also allow you to test how different actions might affect that, to look at different scenarios and predict how they'll play out.
There are many different models of infection, but at their simplest, they're all based on a single idea.
Mathematical models are like a simulated version of reality. You can kind of think of them almost as computer games. And if I want to simulate how a virus spreads through a population, first, I'm going to need some simulated people. So here are my 200 individuals.
The more complex models don't involve dots on a screen, but like this one, they do involve programming in human behaviour. And in this version, all my humans are programmed to behave in the same way. The next stage is to seed the virus into this population.
This red dot right here represents an infected individual, and each infected individual can go on to infect others.
Over time, infected individuals turn blue as they either recover or not, but they stop infecting anyone else.
You've got 3 groups of people. You've got susceptible, recovered and infected. And tracking how people move between those 3 groups and counting them at those different stages is really at the very heart of all of these epidemiological models that you've heard of.
It's this principle that allows models to predict how many people will be in each group at any one time.
Of course, where this starts to become really tricky is when you try and get this model to be specific to a particular virus. You kind of think of this in a way as though you're tuning your model. You're trying to find the particular parameters that let the model replicate how a particular virus behaves.
So, for example, you can program in what you know about how long someone stays infected for, or how long they are immune for. These parameters will determine how your epidemic will play out. And the more you know about your virus, the more accurately your model will predict how it might spread. You can then test the impact that interventions like social distancing might have. Ultimately, they change the reproduction number.
The reproduction number is the number that everyone talks about. It's how many individuals one person will go on to infect on average. If the reproduction number is greater than 1, your epidemic is on the increase, and anything less than 1, and your epidemic is in decline.
The worry now, as we lift restrictions, is that cases will quickly rise, causing a second peak. Scientists estimate that with no measures in place, so schools open, everyone back at work, this coronavirus has a basic reproduction number of around 2.6. So how will we know what aspects of life can return to normal? Based at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, Dr. Rosalind Ego is part of a team of modellers whose work informs government policy.
Hey Ros, how are you doing?
Hi, good to see you.
They've used data from the pre-lockdown contact patterns of 40,000 people in the UK to produce a model that tests the impact that different measures might have on the reproduction number.
Some people have just said, well, it's really simple. You just do mass testing of the entire population and you're done, right? Why can't you do that, Ros?
First of all, it's a lot of tests and that's a lot of people. And it depends on the behavior of people after they get a positive test, whether they decrease their contacts.
This model assumes that 10% of people won't self-isolate and is based on 460,000 tests a day, many more than are currently being carried out.
We think that people are infectious for a fairly short time, and so they'll only test positive for a short time. It doesn't have quite as much impact on the reproduction number as we might hope. Maybe change it from 2.6 to 2.5, something like that.
Oh, almost nothing then.
The group also looked at the use of a digital app, like the one being trialled on the Isle of Wight, assuming roughly half of the population would use it.
Well, the app might help. If we use the app to do digital contact tracing, if those people who are alerted decrease their contacts and do quarantine at home. And so that might decrease the reproduction number to about 1.4.
Okay.
The strategy of testing, contact tracing and quarantine has been widely used in other countries. In South Korea, it quickly brought the reproduction number to near zero, breaking the circuit of transmission. But it works best if the number of new infections is low, which is not the case in the UK right now.
Is there anything that does get the reproduction number below 1?
Well, in this particular model, a combination of digital contact tracing using the app, manual contact tracing, as well as decreasing the number of people you see outside of work. And in this particular model, when that number was 4, that brought the reproduction number down to 0.9.
There's not that much wiggle room there.
No, there isn't.
I guess there's trade-offs there. It's possible that we can go back to work, we can go back to school, just as long as simultaneously we limit how many people we're seeing outside of home and school, we do loads of mass testing, we do manual contact tracing, we have the app. Is it like you're standing over an incredibly finely balanced set of scales here, Ross, and you're like, right, we want to put going back to school on, what do we have to take off?
Yeah, that's very much what it's like. But in each of those things, we don't know how heavy the weights are on either side.
What's quite clear is that there's probably going to be a lot of trial and a little bit of error ahead of us. But crucial to that entire process, all the way along, is going to be monitoring and tracking what's happening to the reproduction number R.
At the moment, there is a delay in tracking R. It can be 20 days out of date as it relies on data like the number of hospitalisations and deaths. But one of the UK's most eminent professors of mathematics, Mike Cates, is leading an initiative to find a more immediate way to monitor this critical figure. The aim is to create a series of models that look at how we behave and the impact that has on the virus. To do so, he's bringing together all kinds of expertise from construction companies, supermarkets and others, people who would never normally collaborate.
So, for instance, there are people who would understand the fluid mechanics of, what happens when you cough. And then we can link them to other people who are interested in the flow of air in buildings. Then you have a cough interacting with an airflow in a building. And then at a larger scale, there's teams of people whose expertise is to do with how humans behave in confined spaces. And then people who think about human behavior at the scale of a whole city. So all of those things need to be linked together to get a complete picture of what's going on.
If you're going from the scale of a cough to the scale of the entire country and everything possible in between, I mean, that's vast.
Absolutely.
Every day, huge amounts of real-time data is already collected about how we move around by shops, mobile phone companies and on transport networks. Feeding this data into the new models would help track R more accurately and quickly.
Say you try, okay, 18 to 35-year-olds can go back to work. The next day, from the phone data, you can tell how much and who is moving around where and how much more they're coming into contact than they were before. And that gives you an immediate sense of whether you made a good or a bad choice.
Life over the next year just isn't going to be the same as it was before.
until we can find a vaccine or an effective treatment, some of these measures are going to have to stay in place. But the more that we can understand about the reproduction number, the more that we learn about how our behaviour changes the spread of this virus, the more chance we have at some semblance of normality.
Now, what might happen to this coronavirus after the pandemic? Well, one of the coronaviruses that causes common colds today is thought to have been responsible for a pandemic that killed over 1 million people back in 1890. Lots of scientists think that it's likely that this new coronavirus will continue to circulate. Children will get it when they're young, and they'll develop some degree of immunity as they grow up. So eventually it may become no more dangerous than a cold virus. But even if that does happen, we're certain to face other viral threats.